Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. How are you? All hope all of you are going well. Welcome to ASEAN Center for Energy webinars in July 2018. In this month, we have the webinar on the title of the floating solar PV in ASEAN. I would like to start the webinar by introducing you shortly about the webinar itself. As I mentioned previously, that the webinar is on the title of floating solar PV in ASEAN. The target audience of this webinar are energy regulators, policymakers on energy sectors, including energy researchers, academia, and also private sectors. This webinar is conducting from 2 until 3 p.m. at Jakarta time, or at 3 at the Kuala Lumpur and Singapore time, or at 4 p.m. at the Korean times. I would like to introduce myself. My name is Muhammad Siddiq, a technical officer of ASEAN German Energy Program at ASEAN Center for Energy based in Jakarta. During this presentation, I will gonna moderate you for this webinar. So before we going further to the content of the webinar, the expected outcomes of the webinar is to first encourage discussion on solar PV, particularly for floating solar PV development in ASEAN, and also as a platform for information action and multi-stakeholder discussions. The agenda for today's webinar, firstly, I will gonna introduce you about the ASEAN Center for Energy itself. Next, it will be the introduction of East ASEAN Renewable and Alternative Power Generation, or RLPG Workstream, which will be delivered by my colleague, Mr. Abdul Matin from Ministry of Energy and Industry, Brunei Darussalam. Also, I will gonna introduce you about ASEAN Clean Energy Summit, which is one of the agenda of ASEAN Clean Energy Summit is also focusing on the floating solar PV. So through this webinar, we want to give you introduction or introduce you about the floating solar PV itself. Next, the main agenda is a presentation from the three speakers. Thank you for the three speakers. They are joining this webinars. First, we have Mr. Muhammad Razwan from TNBR Malaysia. The second one is we have Dr. Thomas Randall from Series Nanyang University of Singapore. And the third one is Dr. Chang Soo-kwon from Korea. After the presentation of those three panelists, we will continue this webinar on the discussion and Q&A sessions. Move to the next slide. ASEAN Center for Energy at a glance. ASEAN Center for Energy have three main roles, which is as a think tank, which is identifying and surfacing innovative solutions. Second one, the role is as energy data and knowledge hub, which is to provide a knowledge depository for ASEAN member states. And the third one is a catalyst, which is to unify and strengthen ASEAN energy cooperation and integration in Southeast Asia. Our main activities including a research, publication, training, capacity building, workshop, policy actions, and also recommendation, and etc. As you can see here, there are some report that you can see here of our publications, and also our activities like doing the workshops and also capacity building and knowledge exchange. Move to the next agenda, the introduction about the RLPG Workstream, which will be delivered by my colleagues, Mr. Abdul Matin from Ministry of Energy and Industry, Brunei Darussalam. Mr. Matin is a head of Renewable Energy Unit under the Sustainable Energy Division at the Ministry of Energy and Industry at Brunei Darussalam. Mr.
Hello.
Martin, time is yours to present about the LPG work streams.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Siddiq. I believe everyone can hear me now. I appreciate the introduction, Siddiq. Thank you, everyone. Distinguished colleagues from the Ministry of Energy and Industry of Brunei Darussalam. We also have here colleagues from the Brunei National Energy Research Institute together with us in a room. Colleagues from ASEAN Center of Energy, distinguished speakers, webinar participants, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. On behalf of the Ministry of Energy and Industry and the chair of the Renewable and Alternative Power Generation Workstream, it is a great pleasure for me to welcome you to the Floating Solar PV webinar, which is an event under the East Asia Summit Energy Cooperation Task Force. This event is organized by the Ministry of Energy and Industry of Brunei Darussalam, together with the ASEAN Center for Energy, with the collaboration of CERIS via EMA of Singapore, TNB Research of Malaysia, and LSIS of Korea. In this opportunity, I also like to extend a special welcome and thanks to our invited distinguished speakers and experts, Mr. Mohammad Razwan Rusli, who is a researcher on Renewable Energy and Green Technology Unit of TNB Research of Malaysia, Dr. Thomas Randall, the Deputy CEO, Cluster Director, Solar Energy Systems, Solar Energy Research Institute of Singapore of the NUS, and lastly, Dr. Chang Sapwon, the Principal Research Engineer, Power Conversion Research Team, Electro Technology R&D Division of LSIS Company Limited of Korea. Thank you and welcome. Dear webinar participants, the landmark Paris Agreement, which sets goals for taking action on climate change and supported by countries' ambitions to reduce carbon emission, will present an exciting opportunity for the transition to renewable energy. According to IRENA, the cost of generating power from renewable energy has reached grid parity for many technologies in many parts of the world. Solar PV is leading this cost decline, with the costs falling about 75% since 2010 and continues to decrease until today. Solar PV has also emerged as one of the fastest, least risk investments to meet rapid growth for electricity and even boost export capacity and revenues in several East Asian countries. In tandem with this growth and adoption of solar PV, there's been a great interest in looking at a more cost-effective alternative to land-based PV systems. The floating solar PV has quickly become a trend in regions with high land costs, land scarcity, and underutilized water area. Large-scale installations can already be seen today, but there are insufficient studies being carried out to assess in detail the technical implications as well as the economic and environmental aspects when deploying solar PV systems in a larger scale. This includes analyzing and quantifying the possible benefits, such as the evaporative cooling effect on the PV modules and the accelerated degradation effects on the system performance. A number of East Asian countries, including the ASEAN member states, have already begun to install floating solar PV systems over the last few years. These countries have gathered substantial experiences in procuring, installing, and operating the system. The technical and economic challenges and lessons learned by these early pioneers are considered crucial for the next group of countries that are planning to develop floating solar PV. And therefore, the webinar today aims to deliberate East Asian countries' experiences, identify key factors and barriers, and share lessons learned in stimulating the installations of floating solar PV across this region. It is hoped that the East Asian countries, especially the ASEAN member states, will continue to capitalize on these opportunities and consider floating solar PV for their power generation next in the near future. And with that, I wish you all a very productive and successful webinar, and I look forward to your active participation and productive exchanges during the Q&A session. Thank you. Thank you, Siddiq.
Thank you, Mr. Martin, for your introduction of the RLPG workshop activities. Now we move to the next agenda. Introduction of ASEAN Clean Energy Summit 2018, which will be held under Singapore. This event is Asia's leading event focusing on clean energy technology, policy, and finance. It is also provide a common platform for regional thought leaders in both the public and private sector to collaborate on critical issues and opportunities in harnessing clean energy for the futures. It supports Singapore's vision to be a clean energy hub for Asia. It also provides a platform to discuss, understand, and experience Singapore's living laboratory for solar adoptions, the integration of renewable energy and electric vehicles. In the ASES or ASEAN Clean Energy Summits, there are a specific session in floating solar PV called International Floating Solar Symposium or IFSS. The content of the symposiums including the novel concepts of floating PV and the modules. Wait a second, what happened? Can everybody see? Yeah, I will gonna continue. There is a bit delay for showing my presentations. I will continue about the International Floating Solar Symposiums. The content of the IFSS including novel concept for floating PV system and the modules, also about the BOS and reliability for floating PV system components, and also operational, environmental, and financial aspect of floating solars. The IFSS will be held on Wednesday, 31st October until Friday, 1st November 2018. For the detailed activities of the symposium, you can access the link of aseancleanenergysummit.com/conference. Now let's move to the main activities of the webinars. We have 3 speakers in the webinar. First, we have the Muhammad Razwan Rusli. He is a researcher, Renewable Energy and Green Technology Unit of TNB Research Malaysia. The second one will be Dr. Thomas Randall. He is a Deputy COO and Cluster Director for Solar Energy System at Solar Energy Research Institute of Singapore or SERIS, National University of Singapore. The third speaker is Dr. Chang Soo Won. He is a Principal Research Engineer at Power Conversion Research Team, Electro Technology R&D Division, LCIS, Korea. So before we go to the first webinar, I would like to inform you that if all of you have the questions, in GoToMeeting, we have the question toolbox there. So during presentations, if you have the question, you can type your question in the question toolbox. Because at the end of the presentation, they are only limited time for the Q&A. So at the Q&A, if there is questions in my question toolbox, I will gonna read it and deliver to the respective speakers. Now let's move on the first speakers. I would like to introduce you shortly about the Mr. Muhammad Razwan Rusli profile. Mr. Razwan is a researcher with the Green Technology Research Group at the TNB Research, TNBR in Malaysia. His research focus is in solar energy system. In previous years, he led the pilot floating PV project funded by the Malaysian Electricity Supply Industry and Trust Account, or MESITA. Prior to working at TNB Research, he was employed as a research assistant at the Fraunhofer Institute for Solar Energy System in Freiburg, Germany, in the Department of Material Research and Applied Optics. Muhammad Razwan graduated from Allen University in Germany in 2010. Mr. Razwan, now your time to present. The time is yours. Hello, everybody. Apologize for the delay. We faced trouble connecting with Mr. Razwan Rusli. We tried to catch him, but we cannot connect with him, and I guess he is self-muted. Can we move to the next agenda? Maybe Dr. Randall can deliver first as the first speakers, and also followed by Mr. Wan. Meanwhile, I will try to connect with Mr. Razwan. If he can able to continue this webinar, he will be placed as the third speakers. Yeah. Is it okay with you, Dr. Randall and Dr. Wan?
Yes, it's fine with me.
Oh, yeah, okay. Now let's move to the other speakers. The first speakers will be Dr. Randall. We're gonna introduce all of you shortly about the Dr. Randall's profiles. Dr. Randall's earned his PhD and Diploma Master of Science from Regensburg University. Also, he was continuing his master's study in INSEAD, Master of Business Administration in Singapore and Fontainebleau, France. Currently, he serves as a Deputy CEO at the Solar Energy System or Series in US. Prior to join the Series in US, he was a managing director at the Proactive New Energy at Regensburg, Germany. Also, he was served as a chief operating officer at Iliotech Solar at Regensburg, Germany. Welcome, Dr. Randall. Now the time is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me just get my presentation up here. Wonderful. Okay. So I hope you can see my presentation. The colleagues, Razwan and Dr. Wan, are talking more about the technical experiences with their deployment and with their test beds. And so I thought to have a more complementary view at the floating PV technology and the potential for ASEAN. I will talk a little bit more about the ways how you can deploy systems and also some financial numbers so that people are able to assess whether floating solar is a viable option in their respective countries. Just a brief introduction of SERIS, if you are not familiar. It's the Solar Energy Research Institute of Singapore. We are part of the National University of Singapore. We were founded in 2008, and we have grown to a size of about 200 people with laboratories in spreading over 6,000 square meters of space. And we do both research and development and deployment, also commercialization of technologies, and we also offer professional services to the industry. Our main focus areas are threefold. One is solar cell development to make solar cells more efficient and cheaper in production. Then PV modules to make modules more durable in tropical climates and to harvest more energy, for example, using bifacial technologies. And then solar systems, which we are talking about more today, like floating solar. And we're also looking into grid integration of variable renewable and also looking into building integrated PV. As you may have heard, in Singapore, we are operating the world's largest test bed for floating solar. which is where we also collect a great wealth of information about the cooling effect, about bifacial technologies, about technical issues, electrical safety, etc. Knowing that the other colleagues are also talking in today's webinar about test bedding, I will rather refer you to this PV Tech magazine article, which was published a few months ago, which describes in more detail our test bed and some initial results of it. In today's part, I will focus on three topics. One, a bit of an introduction to floating PV technologies. One about cost comparison, and a very intriguing aspect of deployment of floating PV with a great potential in ASEAN is the hybrid operation of floating solar with existing hydropower station. So going into the introduction, you have seen this probably before. If you look on a global scale, the areas available for floating solar on this planet, we have 400,000 square kilometers of man-made reservoirs. And if you add up all these reservoir spaces, it's actually more than what the world has on rooftop spaces. So the potential is enormous, and we believe that floating solar will become the third pillar of the PV industry after ground-mounted and rooftop systems. The benefits there are various benefits for floating solar solutions, apart from the fact which Shrik already mentioned, that in many countries land is scarce or expensive, and that's why it is a very interesting option for countries like Japan, Korea, or Singapore as an alternative deployment method. There are certain technical benefits. One is the evaporative cooling from the water, which eventually cools the solar panels, and as such increases the yield, the energy yield, which you gain from the solar panels. Another factor is you can use water surfaces which are typically not utilized. There's some water bodies are utilized for recreational purposes or are multi-use for flood control or irrigation. But in many cases, water surfaces, especially also for hydropower, are not utilized at all. A very interesting aspect, especially in countries where we look into irrigation or water supply, whenever you cover the surface of a reservoir or a water body, you would also reduce the evaporation losses. And this could be of strategic interest also, for example, here in Singapore, where the reservoirs which are earmarked for floating solar are at the same time used for rainwater capture, and hence covering parts of those with floating solar will keep more water in the reservoirs by shading it from evaporation. And there's also a proposed reduction in algae growth because of less energy or heat intake into the water body. I will only show this one graph from the results from our test bed, from our 1.1 megawatt test bed in Singapore, which shows that the performance ratio, which is typically around 78% for rooftop in Singapore, that the performance ratio of the floating solar system goes up all the way into the 88 and some are close to 90%, which is about 10 to 15% higher energy yield than for comparative rooftop installations. And this confirms from the previous slide that there is a cooling effect, and the cooling effect turns into higher energy yield. When we talk about floating PV, we really mean floating. So we have a floating body, which could be the panel itself, or a plastic float, or any structure that floats. What we do not consider when we talk about floating solar is floating or installations like here on the upper right, which are on piles. This is a method which has been largely deployed in China in combination with fish farming. But this is something which we would not consider for floating solar. And in most of our discussions here in ASEAN, we also do not see that people would go for this piling option. We are really talking about floating solar itself. This is just a glance of some of the largest installations which are already out there. Without going into the details, the idea is to show that floating solar is already a professional way of implementing solar systems. So it's not that there is a few researchers or universities are putting things up on the water. This has grown to a several $100 million industry already. And the largest installations which you see, which are currently in China, they already reach 150 megawatt for the largest installation. So this is really professional implementation, which also means from a financing perspective that the technology risks are getting smaller and smaller, and bank financing and general financing will be easier obtained. The largest system at the moment outside of China is the 13.7 megawatt system at Yamakura in Japan. Here are just some pictures. So these are large water bodies which are to a certain degree or to a large degree covered with floating solar. And most of these pictures are from China, where they use former coal mines which have filled up with groundwater, and thus it's kind of a dead water where there's not much environmental concerns. And that's where all these very large installations are deployed today. And the industry has grown to a level that you can buy off the shelf, say 2.5 megawatt floating solar arrays, which come in the floating structure, the PV panels, the DC interconnects, and there are even manufacturers which provide the central inverters on a floating structure, including the transformer, and then have a 20 or 22 kV connection to land. So this, again, to build the trust, to bring the message across that this has reached a state where it's a very professional industry. And so deployment is then more reduced to the project development and finding the most suitable pieces of land. When we talk about cost comparison, this is always the question, is it more expensive or less? The graph here shows over the years, dating all the way back to 2014, what is the evolvement of the cost. And what we observe is that we are reaching, and we have also tried to do a breakdown of that, we are reaching about $1 per watt fully deployed turnkey installation of floating solar. And that means that we are not far away or very close to ground-mounted installations. And if you have the same cost of deployment, but at the same time you gain up to 10 to 15% more yield from the same installed capacity, then your overall levelized cost of electricity actually goes down. And so we see also from a cost perspective that floating solar going forward will not be more expensive than ground-mounted installations. If you then calculate the levelized cost of electricity, then based on this previous number, we are currently looking at around 10 US cents per kilowatt hour, knowing, and this is why we have this tornado chart here, that the levelized cost of electricity largely depends on your assumptions, because it's a life cycle analysis, in this case for 20 years. And you see that apart from the investment cost, if you get the system deployed cheaper and cheaper in the future, your LCOE goes down. But you can also see in the top line that the interest rate and the cost, basically the cost of financing, have a substantial impact on your LCOE. But at large, we're looking at a range of about 7 to 15 cents, depending on the various assumptions. And this, just to give you a bit of a comparison where we are, if we look at the 7 to 15 cents, this band here, and we have put here the electricity prices in US cents for the various countries. And for most ASEAN countries, the levelized cost of electricity from floating solar are somewhere comparable, at least with commercial electricity prices. And so that means there is a huge potential for deployment of floating solar in an economically viable way here in ASEAN. Now, I want to highlight one technical aspect, and that's the hybrid operation of hydropower and especially existing hydropower with floating solar. And we have done quite a number of projects in that space, specifically in Cambodia and in Laos, where we have looked into adding floating solar in a larger scale to some of the existing hydropower dams. And this was very beneficial at the end, and we are currently in discussion with the respective governments and owners of the hydropower facilities for an implementation and adding floating solar to these hydropower dams. Generally, hydro dams is a very suitable option. We can also look for the deployment at other options like lakes, reservoirs, quarries, mines. But in this case, we are looking more into hydropower. The world has about 1 terawatt installed capacity, and 5% of that is actually in Southeast Asia, which is 200 gigawatts of installed hydropower capacity, which has, and there's one interesting aspect, and this is now a table which we looked at from various hydropower dams around the world. And you see in the fourth column, you see the installed hydropower capacity, which is in this case for the largest dams in the gigawatt range. And then on the last column, you see the fraction of the reservoir which needs to be covered in order to match the existing hydropower facility. And these numbers in the last column are strikingly low. So in most cases, it's only 1, 2, 3, 4%. So a tiny fraction of these large hydropower dams, if they are covered with floating solar, you can already match the existing hydropower facility. And most hydropower dams typically run at a capacity utilization factor of about 50%. So by adding floating solar, you can actually make more out of the existing infrastructure for the hydropower dam. And there are various benefits of adding floating solar to hydropower stations. One is you have by definition a reservoir surface available. Another one, there is an existing power grid compared to other ground-mounted systems where you often have problems or additional cost for the evacuation lines. And then there is also the great advantage that you can smooth the variability of PV by adjusting the hydropower output accordingly. So if you have clouds moving in, you can generate more electricity with hydropower. And then when the clouds move away and you have more solar power, you can then go back to solar power. Plus, you can optimize the day-night operation, so you generate more electricity with solar power during the day, keep water in the reservoir, and then generate continuously also throughout the night. And in especially in ASEAN countries, you also have with the monsoon seasons the benefit that in dry season, naturally you have more solar power and you compensate for the missing hydropower during the dry season, and vice versa in the wet season. So in a summary, so to speak, you can use the reservoir as a giant battery without adding additional cost, which is indeed a striking benefit of combining hydropower with floating solar. I just give you briefly one example of a combination of hydropower with PV. It's in China, the Longyanxia hydropower plant, which is a 1.3 gigawatt hydropower facility. In this case, the PV part is not floating, but it's jointly operated with the hydropower, and therefore this is a very relevant example. So this hydropower facility has 4 turbines of 320 megawatts, and it has a nearby PV installation with 850 megawatts, which happens to be the largest installation at the moment in the world. And what the benefit here is, the operation of the hydropower plant is carried out in a way as if the PV plant would be a fifth turbine. So they add up, if you look at these graphs here, which are for a sunny day in the upper left, for a cloudy day in the lower left, and for a very cloudy day in the upper right, then you see the blue curve, which is the PV output. And then you see the purple curve. And behind the purple curve, there's actually also another dark blue curve. And the purple curve is what the grid operator tells the combined facility to output into the grid. And the green curve is the way how the hydropower facility is managed. So the hydropower facility is managed perfectly in a way that it absorbs all the solar power and eventually generates the combined output in a way that the solar power and hydropower combined exactly match what was the predetermined curve from the grid operator. So if you have a cloudy day and you see if there are clouds moving in and out, then the hydropower facility is adjusted accordingly. And in this case, they can adjust about 50 megawatt plus minus every 8 minutes. So this is an example that it's even on this very large scale, in a gigawatt scale, it is possible to jointly operate a hydropower facility with a solar power. And in this case, it's not floating, but it may as well floating. That does not change the concept. And so it gives you the idea that there's huge potential because many ASEAN countries have large installations of hydropower. So in summary, floating solar has the potential to become a terawatt market, and it is already on the way. The LCOE approaches the range of ground-mounted installations, so it is also economically viable going forward. The cooling effect is very beneficial, and we see about 10 to 15% higher yield from the floating solar compared to rooftop installations. We also saw that bifacial technology does not work, but as I highlighted, there's a great opportunity to combine hydropower with floating PV by using the reservoir as a giant battery. And as Shidik already mentioned, if you want to learn more and in much more detail, we will have a 3-day conference end of October, beginning of November, the International Floating Solar Symposium, which we held already last year for the first time, which was a great success. And you're all invited to join us this year for the 2nd edition of IFSS. And with that, I thank you very much for your attention. And I'm curious to also learn from our other colleagues in the call and to answer all your questions after the webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Randall, for nice presentations. Now move to the next present. I would like to inform you that Mr. Razwan is now with us. His connection is goes better. Now next to the next presentation will be delivered by Mr. Razwan from TNBR.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Razwan, time is yours.
Okay. Hello. Hello, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me now. So let me switch my screen first. Okay. All right. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Mr. Siddiq. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good afternoon to everyone. As mentioned by our moderator, my name is Muhammad Razwan bin Musli. Please call me Razwan. I work at TNB Research, or TMBR, with the Renewable Energy and Green Technology Unit, focusing on solar energy and recently on wind energy. In 2014, I was appointed as project leader to develop a pilot floating photovoltaic system and evaluate its technical feasibility and commercial viability under Malaysian weather condition. This presentation will report some of the findings of this project, which is funded by the AAIBE. I will explain about the AIBE later, but first let me give a brief introduction about my company. TNB Research, or TMBR for short, is a wholly owned subsidiary of Tenaga Nasional Berhad, the largest electricity utility in Malaysia, which operates only in Peninsular Malaysia or West Malaysia. Established in 1993, our company was awarded the R&D status company in 1997 to take advantage of the R&D incentive offered by the federal government. Currently, with almost 100 full-time researchers, the MBR is the largest R&D company in Malaysia, and we carry out R&D activities on the whole value chain of electricity supply industry, as well as on new technologies with emphasis on adapting to local conditions. TMBR also has a subsidiary company called TMBR QATS. QATS, which stands for Quality Assurance and Technical Services, carries out activities mainly in quality assurance, scientific services, as well as technical services. QATS, which is internationally accredited and recognized, has clients all over the world and has over 15 years of experience providing this kind of services. Please do check our website at www.tmbr.com.my. You will find the link at the end of the slide. Now, let us dive into our topic today, namely the pilot floating PV R&D project. Here is a brief overview of the project. The project was carried out between March 2015 and March 2017. The pilot system is located at the Sungai Labu off-river storage near the Kuala Lumpur International Airport. I will show you the map, the location later. The system peak power is 108 kilowatt, and it was commissioned in February 2016. Total project cost, including capex, manpower, and R&D activities, is slightly below 4 million ringgit, Malaysian ringgit, and the project is funded by AIBE with 80% and TMB with 20%. The motivation behind the project is that solar PV requires large area, and since TMB prefer to build large power plant due to economy of scale, this means to build large-scale ground-mounted PV system on land will compete with other needs, especially agriculture, perhaps housing, as well as industrial needs. So we thought that one possible solution is to install the PV system on the surface of lake, many of which we at TMB operates as reservoir for hydroelectric power plants. So we did an estimate earlier on in 2014, and we found out the large potential of floating PV in Peninsular Malaysia. So the estimate has been updated using current technology, and now it stood at 10 gigawatt And that only requires 10% coverage of 78 major lakes in Peninsular Malaysia. So we have not done the estimate for offshore potential yet, but clearly the potential is immense. So we decided to embark on this project, initially as an internal project, but later it was expanded and become a sort of national project with majority funding from the AAIBE. So now, what is AIBE? It stands for Account Amanah Industri Bekalan Elektrik, which translated into English as Malaysian Electricity Supply Industry Trust Account. It is kind of a fund that receives funding from all power generating entities in Peninsular Malaysia and Sabah. These companies, including TMB Power Plant, contribute about 1% of their annual revenue as part of their corporate social responsibility. The fund is administered by a secretariat under the Ministry of Energy, and the monies are used for the following 6 main areas, namely rural electrification, R&D, training and education, encouraging energy efficiency, development and promotion of the electricity supply industry, as well as seed fund for special projects approved by the trustee of Electricity Trust Fund. Now, please have a look at the project site. The pilot floating PV system that we installed were located at a place called Sungai Labu Off-River Storage. It is located, as you can see from the cuttings of the Google Maps on the right-hand side, the ORS or the Off-River Storage is located quite close to the Kuala Lumpur International Airport. Indeed, the water treatment plant located just south of the ORS were built to ensure adequate supply of drinking water for the KLIA complex and its surrounding areas. The Labu River nearby, and then the river from the raw water from the ORS will be pumped for treatment to the water treatment plant before it being distributed to the surrounding area. So this is the overall system design of the floating PV system that we developed, that we installed at the Sungai Labu Off-River Storage. So it consists of two main areas, namely the solar arrays and the electrical substation. So we prefer to call the solar arrays solar islands, and it consists of 12 by 9 kilowatt peak PV arrays. It consists of 432 pieces of 250 watt peak polycrystalline silicon modules made and produced by REC Solar. We mounted the PV panels on a floating device made by a French company called Cieletier, and the solar islands is anchored by 4 bottom anchors connected at the corners, each corners of the solar island, and also by 2 bank anchors to the river banks. To lay DC cables from the solar panel, which will be connected to the inverters at the riverbank, we install a 50-meter floating bridge using secondary floaters, also by Cieletier. The inverters that we use are 12 by 9 kilowatt AC 3-phase string inverters made from Power series by Kako Energy, and the inverters is then connected to a 300 kVA step-up transformer from 400 volt to 11 kilovolt before connecting to the nearest the existing substation, which is about 100 meter away. So this is a picture during the commissioning of the floating PV system. Before I show you a little bit of the result or findings from this R&D project, I would like to explain to you that we have divided our solar island into 12 arrays, and each array has been designed so that it constitutes the following. So the first row, the first array, and to the array 1 up to array 4, we varied the tilt angle. We modified the tilt angle from the original 12 degrees to the following degrees: 0 degrees, 5 degrees, 10 degrees, and 15 degrees. And the array 2 up to array 4, we varied the tilt angle from the original 12 degrees to the following degrees: 0 degrees, 5 degrees, 10 degrees, and 15 degrees. And for the second row, the blue one in this slide, we did not do any modification except on the cable size, whereas for the last rows, the yellow rows, we changed the air gap variation between the water surface and the back of the PV modules. So in this instance, array 9s, we did not change anything, but for array 10, 11, and 12, we increases the gap over 5 centimeter interval. So here is the result after 1 year. So we found out overall the pilot PV system that we installed performed about 10.4% better compared to our reference system, which is a carport system in the nearby which is installed for the Kuala Lumpur International Airport. So the reference system has a PR system for the duration of our study at 81%, but of course the result was not weather corrected, but it can give a general impression that the floating PV system actually do perform better than ground mounted system. We also did a capex comparison for our system. We compare it with average ground mounted comparable ground mounted system during that time, and also we also did a benchmark visit in South Korea, where we found a similar system in a place called Ochang, whereby the cost we found out the cost, and here as you can see in the slide, our cost is actually 140% higher than comparable system for ground mounted, but slightly lower than a comparable system in South Korea. So this data is in 2005, and I believe now we can get a comparable cost with ground mounted system, because in the recently concluded large scale solar tender, there are three companies that bid for floating. There are three bidding winners that will be installing floating PV under the large scale solar scheme. At the same time, we also carry out a water quality monitoring practice because as you can see, the ORS is built for a water treatment plant. So here are the water quality monitoring practice that we perform. We basically take a water sample at 3 points, and then send the water sample to accredited laboratory for testing. And these are the points. And the parameter tested were according to Malaysian Food Act and Food Regulation 1985. And based on the collected data, we found out that the overall water quality at the off-river storage was not affected by the installation of the FPV. Finally, we would like to discuss some challenges faced by the project team. Because we were given a site to do the project, so we have to adapt the site we have to adapt our design to the site condition. So the off-river storage has a very large fluctuating water level, around 20 centimeters in a year. So we have to design anchoring and mooring system that is adaptive. But we have to find the balance between increasing flexibility and cost. If we increase the flexibility, it will increase the cost, and vice versa. We also found out that drop in water level during construction will complicate the installation. And during that time, we found that low availability of non-standard components actually increases the cost of our project. And lastly, abrupt changes in water condition affected construction at site. The next few slides, I will just show you some pictures. So these are during the installation of the platform. These are the installation assembling of the PV modules, mainly using manual labels. And these are during the testing and commissioning, which is witnessed by the local authority. And these are the image of the system when it was just completed. So that's all from me. So you can find the website of TMBR at this slide, and I hope I hope to hear from you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Raswan, for your presentations. Now we move to the last presentations coming from our college in Korea. This will be delivered by Dr. Chang Soo Won. I would like to introduce you shortly about Dr. Won profiles. Dr. Won is a principal research engineer at the Power Conversion Research Team Electro Technology R&D Division at LSIS Korea. He is very experienced in PV, such as working on the cost-effective and standardized floating PV system developments, also working on the high temp-proof module research for floating PV system and others. Dr. Won received his bachelor, master, and PhD degree from Konkuk University in electrical engineering. Now, Dr. Won, time is yours. You may present your presentations.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chang Soo Won. This is Anyang in Korea. First, thank you, the ASEAN Center of Energy, for giving me the opportunity to give a present. Just now, I give you presentation about floating PV system. Just now I give you a presented about floating PV system. Especially today topic is about evaluation of the floating PV system during 4 years from 2012 to 2050. My present will be posted in the following that content. And it consists of the company overview, module evaluation, system stability, and conclusion. First is company overview. Let me introduce my companies. Our company is LSIS. Our company's main business is equipment manufacturing company, include the renewable energy such as solar energy and battery and smart grid. And I work in the smart energy business groups. And this slide is show the key benefit of the floating PV systems. It's compared to run installation PV systems, floating PV systems have a advantage in both economic and environment aspect. It's for economics, a floating PV system is enable efficient space utilization, and that can remove the deforesting issues. Also, floating PV system get more electrical generation than wind installed PV system because of natural cooling effect by the water. And environment, floating PV system and environment. A floating PV system can be controlled green tide by blocking sunlight, and the buoyant structure used the floating PV system can help this preserve the aquatic ecosystem by blocking sunlight. And This section is explain the floating PV models and evaluate for the dam. And in this slide, we will explain the characteristic of the environment where floating PV stems are installed. It's shown. The slide is legible. And the left figure is in the place where the solar system installed is surrounded by the dense fog before the sunrise. That one. And state immediately after the sunrise, and is shown the figure the top right, and in this figure is surface part is look like RPQ, and some part is look like transparency. That one is RPQ part is the water drop path is attached to surface. Just like you look is a junction box in below that center of the right pictures is and RPQ the part is that one, and then it's a transparent is in that one is that one is drop path is correct and through down, and in through down and this section explains the floating PV modules. Sorry. We had this report 2 modules that developed the floating PV modules. So one module has been operated on the coastal island for the long time, and this module was produced by the company in our company in 1992, about 2 years ago. It closed the bottom of the modules, which was caused by water penetration for the aged butyl rubber used as a sealing material of the module. Was the hardness. The water that the penetrations, the module hydrolyzes EVA and colloid the cell and ribbons. Another module is a sample taken from the buoyant on the sea. That one is a module that our company replaced in a buoy every 5 years. Figure of the modules. Failure of the modules are called junction box corrosion, but bus ribbon corrosion and frame corrosion. Is junction box corrosion and ribbon corrosion are caused by moisture, and frame corrosion by dropping from the board. We have developed a module with the following characteristics by refer to the contents of the previous page. Is the solution of the problem with the moisture is use of encapsulant that does not react the moisture, and to the increase the IP rating in the junction box in order to protect the natural environment. We use the lead-free ribbons. Water stored in the dam or reservoir is used of farming or drinking water and should not be contain any harmful substance to human body. Current most photovoltaic module material do not contain the hazard sustain, but it's a ribbon for electrical connection was contain the lead. Floating PV module has been developed by remove the lead in the ribbon, as designed to protect the environment modules. Compared to the general modules, the developed modules has no problem in output even after 5,000 hours of damp-free test. Most of general modules can be seen have a dramatic decrease in the output after 3,000 hours. And that one is potential induced degradation endurance is and in high humidity environment such as a dam or a reservoir, the probability of PID occurrence also increase. The developed modules use the POE encapsulant instead of EVA. In this way, we develop the module without PID. The one evaluation of the module degradation is for the evaluation of the floating PV modules. We collected 100 installed modules and measured them in the ST state once every 2 years. So we have conducted 2 measurement times. As a result, the average output reduction rate per year was 0.07%, and the standard deviation was 0.59% for 4 years. The actual output reduction is not on average output decreasing, but on output reduction that take into the account the module standard deviation. A study of this was published in paper in 2008. Applying to this study, we developed floating PV modules can be predict power reduction of 13.5% after 25 years. This slide shows a test bed that evaluation the performance of the systems. It had been installed in 2011, and that was 100 kilowatt systems. Natural cooling on the advantage of floating PV system increase the output. We compare the temperature characteristic of the floating PV system and the rooftop PV system. In left figure is we can see that floating PV module is lower in temperature than the rooftop PV modules, and rooftop line is red. Is a floating PV line is blue. In the right figure, we can see the what temperature the electric generation in the highest. The floating PV system is the highest electrical generation in the temperature ranges of 50 to 25 degrees. That point. And the rooftop system in the 25 and 30 temperature range is highest generation. The floating PV system is output is a maximum power about 15 degree lower than of the rooftop system. I think that is a different. This this point and this point is advantage of the temperature. This slide shown the quantity of the electricity generation from PV system from 2012 to 2050. This curve are same as a general PV system output characteristic in the Korean climate. In the sum of the 2040, however, we were lost data due to a failure of the monitoring system. As a way of the evaluation of the floating PV system, we applied the performance ratio. In first year operating 94, very high PR was obtained. Then stable and PR was 80% is 80% obtained. This is this slide showing the quantity of. This slide shows what test bed for the system stability has been installed in 2012 and then that was a 500 kilowatt system. Typhoon Bolaben passed through the installation area in the fall of 2012. With this experience, we were able to check the stability of the system by typhoon. Now let's look at the video clip we had shot at the time. Maximum wind speed of the typhoon was about 35 meters per second. The solar system remained stable. This slide is about environment impact study. We had studied the impact of the floating PV system on the natural environment from 2011 to 2016. This service had been conducted by the Korean Environmental Institute. They conducted various environmental monitoring and then assesses their impact according to the service result. according to the service result, no correlation was found between installed floating PV system and environmental impact. This page is a summary of this presentation. We have been researching this floating PV system since 2011. We have been operating some kinds of test bed. The module used in the test bed was floating PV system dedicated modules, and we obtained the result that an annual about change of the minus 0.07% and a 4-year standard deviation change of 0.58% in the module regulation. We were convinced the floating PV system that we installed is a good efficiency, stable system for the typhoon and the natural environment. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Won, for the presentations. It is very nice presentations. Now we should move to the last agenda, which is questions and answer sessions. Now we receive several questions. There are 3 up to 4 questions that comes to me. But before we go into presentations, due to the time limitations and we have run out of the time, only selected question that will be delivered during this webinar. But for the rest of the questions which is not yet answered during this webinar will be delivered in by email. So your question, if not answered yet in this webinar, I will send your questions to the specific panelists, and then the panelists will answer to the email, and I will share to you the questions through the emails. First, we have question from Mr. Dedi Novandi. He asks about the environmental impacts about the floating solar PV. As Dr. Won have delivered shortly in his presentation about the impacts. Mr. Dedi asks about, is there any research on specific ecosystem in water will impact when the floating PV is implemented or installed? Maybe Dr. Randall can adding answers or responding for these questions.
Okay, thank you for the question. So we have looked in our test bed in Singapore. We also looked at environmental aspects, and it's similar to the results from Korea. If the size of the floating installation relative to the overall size of the water surface of the reservoir is small, so in our case it was less than 1% of the water surface which is covered with solar panels. If the size is small, then you cannot actually measure any environmental impact. If you go to larger areas, if you cover maybe 1/3 or 1/2 of the reservoir, then this might be a bit different. And we are working on this together with some experts in the United States, also because we are currently writing the first guidebook for floating solar on behalf of the World Bank. And this is a guidebook which will be available in the later this year. And this guidebook will also be freely available for everyone. And that guidebook will then have a section on the environmental impact. Generally, you can say that if you are below, say, 5% or maybe 10% of the reservoir surface, typically you do not have impacts on the environment. It has to be mentioned, though, that the highest level of bioactivity in a reservoir are at the border, at the shore side of the water, where you have a lot of sun energy still reaching the ground of the reservoir. There you have the most bioactivity. So if you install your floating solar system more towards the center, where you have deeper waters, you have definitely less environmental impacts.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Randall, for your explanation based on your experience about the environmental impact. Mr. Raswan, would you add something about the environmental impact based on your experience in Malaysia?
Hello. From as mentioned in our study, we did not do any environmental. We only monitor water quality. And as far as mentioned by Dr. Randall just now, because of the small size, it has no impact. So when we discussed this result with our counterpart, with our colleague at the environmental research unit, they has suggested a limit of at most 10% of 10% coverage of the total surface area of the lake. So that's why in the beginning, when we estimate the potential of floating solar PV for Peninsular Malaysia, we only measure up to 10% coverage only. So our finding is similar to what have been mentioned by Dr. Wan and Dr. Randall. Thank you. Sidi?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Raswan and Dr. Randall, for the answer of the questions. Now move to the other questions. I believe it goes to Dr. Randall. There is a question from Mr. Frank Hawkwitz about your presentation on slide 21, if I'm not mistaken. In slide 21, there are a question from Franks. Why are 20% of the 3 Curtis dam area necessary in order to match the 3 Curtis power generation capacity with floating PV if comparatively accept the Itapu dam 11% on all other dams only 1 to 2% of the reservoir area is required? What makes the 3 gorges so special compared to others?
Okay, thanks, Frank, for the question. So most of these reservoirs in this list expand over a very wide area and have a relatively small installed capacities. They're all in the 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 10 gigawatts, but they create an enormous size of a lake. In the specific case of Three Gorges, first of all, it's the largest hydropower facility in the world. So to match 22 gigawatt, by definition, you already need a huge amount of floating solar in theory. But then also the nature of the Three Gorges is not that it expands into a wide, large area, which is rather shallow, which is the case for most hydropower dams. But it's, as the name suggests, and I had the honor to go to take a boat ride through the Three Gorges Dam before they started the construction. So it's a very deep, a very deep reservoir, which does not create much surface on the top. And so this Three Gorges is indeed a special case because of the nature of the reservoir behind it. It's very deep and very narrow. And so that's why you need a much higher percentage of the water surface in order to match the hydropower output.
Yeah, thank you, Randall, for the explanations. We still have like around 6 or 7 questions, but due to the time limitations, we cannot deliver all of these questions at this time. So I always take note for these questions and will be deliver these questions by email to the panelists. As I mentioned, then I will send or share the answer to all of the participants. If you have still a question, just type in the questions panel and I will deliver to the panelists. So this is the end of the sessions for the today's webinar. I would like to thank you for the three of the panelists to join us in this webinars. Thank you very much and thank you very much for joining us and thank you for all of the attendees who give the time to attend to our webinar. So see you on the next of our webinar in August because we regularly conduct a webinar once a month and usually we conduct around at the end of the month every month. Thank you very much. See you and our next webinar in August. Thank you.